Welcome back to another episode of Lost in the Farmer's Market Garden Life. Now, why the name change? Well, our videos aren't short anymore, so it fits. But anyway, it's 2023 and we have a new season for you that has only been slightly delayed by weather, well, killing at least 3 out of 4 of the things we're going to talk about this month and in February. Wah wah. Anyway, this lovely specimen, I'm sure you recognize it. Those of you in the Carolinas, you might have called it that darn thing. It crops up in lawns. It's very common because it's native to this region. Not a surprise. Its scientific name is Tradescantia virginiana, commonly called widow's tears. Or at least that's the name I was introduced to it in Still's Manual of Herbaceous and Woody Perennials. Now, it's called a bunch of other things, of course. We'll get to that in a moment. But anyway, it is in the Camellianaceae family, which is the dayflower family. Perhaps you've heard of it. I know I have, but let me give you some examples. There is an annual dayflower, sometimes called spider flower, that is considered a semi-invasive weed. Okay? But we know this family more detail because of its houseplant relatives, which have some questionable names. The naming convention for these plants is just weird. Perhaps you've heard of these plants: Joseph's coat, Wandering Jew, Moses in a boat. Yeah. Also, believe it or not, under this heading is Purple Heart, the hardy, though it may or may not be dead in the test gardens, it looks dead, we'll see, plant that has the deep purple foliage and can withstand a lot, except apparently 20-degree temperatures. We'll see. But anyway, there are a lot of dayflowers in the trade. So, of course, you've encountered a dayflower, you just may not have realized that you encountered it. They all have similar features. If you note the jointed stem here and the flower cluster, this one's blooming in the dead of winter because I brought it in for a study item so that I would have good photos. This is a spent flower here. Good photos of this plant so that I could do the edible weeds right up of it. And then I realized, hey, this plant is amazing. So, let's talk about the hard information. But before we get into that real quick, Tradescantia is named for John Tradescant the Elder and John Tradescant the Younger, both of whom collected and brought back tons of plants to Europe. Okay, so now we know where Tradescant comes from. Virginiana means of Virginia, which means of this region, Virginia, North Carolina, and so forth. So, right in the name, it's a native, a very common native. Now, it is hardy in USDA zones 4 through 9. It is a perennial. And again, I emphasize this, it is a native perennial. You should use it for that reason alone. Its soil pH preference is 6.8 to 7.2, and its soil type insensitive. Unless it's sitting in a puddle all the time, it's usually fine. And even then, I have found it in such a variety of landscapes with such a variety of soils. Out here in Cumberland County, North Carolina, and in other places in North Carolina, I don't think you could find a spot where it wouldn't try to grow. Except barren rock with no soil substrate, maybe. The moon? Who knows? Who knows? Maybe NASA should have taken this into space and studied it instead of some of those plants they studied for air cleaning. And here's trouble. Mischief. Anyway, he just has to get his butt in every video. It's not big. Calm down. Everybody's a critic, am I right? Anyway, hopefully you heard him being emotional off camera. But anyway, its exposure preferences, get this: deep shade, partial shade to partial sun, full sun, basically anywhere. How many plants do you know are that versatile? This is like the first. Literally the first. And boy, do I have a story for you at the end of this information segment. But anyway, its height can be 1.5 feet to 3 feet tall. And yes, I've seen photos of this, and this specimen is going to be my tester in 2023. I want to see how big I can get this thing. Because it went from a little about this high to this high, so it's doubled in height being in the greenhouse. Consequently, Mischief doesn't seem to like it. You don't want to chew on it. There's something to this plant. Anyway, its width can be 1 foot to 1.5 foot, so it's basically more tall than it is wide. Now, most guides will say it needs support, like a tomato cage, so it doesn't flop. If it does flop, where the stems touch, like this one here, they may root. So that's how it spreads, but it also spreads by seeds. Its seeds are viable. So if you have one, you have more, definitely. Eradicating clumps of this stuff is, well, an act of futility. I mean, yes, Roundup will get the clump, but its seeds are already on the way, so it doesn't matter, and it may come back regardless. So it's impressive in that regard in its ability to survive, and it's completely adapted to our area. Now, it has other names, like Virginia spiderwort, which is the most common one you'll find. Cow slobber. I have no idea where that one came from, but I'm guessing because it died. The flowers have intense pigmentation, and if a cow eats it because it's 100% safe, it makes their spit blue. I'm guessing. I don't know. Indian paint, which is actually based on some facts, and Trinity flower. Now, let's cover those last two real quick. Indian paint is because the dye in its flowers, the pigment, is so strong that it can be used, extracted, and used to paint stuff. And Native Americans surely did this because this plant was important to a number of Native American peoples. Now, as for Trinity flower, it's because the individual flowers have three petals and I believe it's three pistils and three stamens, and therefore it represents the Holy Trinity. But then again, so does passion flower. So things in threes are just a thing in nature. It's not that big of a deal, really. But if you're into the biblical stuff, it really is. So here's the rest of the deets on this lovely specimen. It will spread by seed. I've already covered that. It will flower a lot. Now the flowers last one day, and in this specimen they are a straight blue color, but they can be blue, pink, purple, lavender, and white naturally. I've seen white ones, I've seen light blue ones. At the time, unfortunately, my mindset on dealing with this plant in specific was very different. It was a mistake. I'll get to that again. I'll get to that in a moment. Now, cultivated varieties can have bicolor flowers, that is two colors, like usually a primary and then the edge of the petals is ringed with another color, and may have chartreuse or different colored foliage. Now, I've seen that at nurseries, and again, at the time, I was like, what the heck are y'all doing? The bloom time for this plant is fall, fall, spring, summer, and the plants in Zone 8A are essentially evergreen. They're out there in the field poking out. I can see them. This one is indoors and hasn't been subject to the hard weather that we've had, but it's like this. And the lab isn't even heated, so you can see it hasn't gone dormant. It's actually grown. I have fed it fertilizer, but it's a perennial and it's essentially evergreen. Why not? Now, young leaves can be eaten raw in salads. How about that? So you'd be eating something like up here. Additionally, they can be fried or boiled as cooked greens. So this plant is 100% edible. Foliage itself can be mashed into a paste that can be used to treat insect bites. So, medicine. Additionally, there are treatments made from the roots, treatments made from the stems that help deal with certain types of cancers and or skin ailments. The flowers are edible. You can extract dye from them. This plant is a superstar level garden perennial. It's something you need to have because it has so many uses that you would be daft not to have it in your garden. Assuming it's not invasive where you are, of course, because just because it's okay here, then I'm in its native range. But it may not be the best choice for where you are. Check your local references with the, agricultural extension or, something or horticultural societies to verify whether or not it's safe to introduce to your area. Besides that, this plant is largely black thumb proof. It's forgiving. It's tough. It may or may not have resistance to herbicides, specifically Roundup, amazingly. And it self-proliferates, but it doesn't dominate at least in its native range anyway. I mean, now that I know how good this plant is, I wouldn't mind this just being my front lawn. It looks kind of like grass, but it has pretty flowers that attract naturally occurring pollinators like mason bees. It's a win. Now, that leads to a little story. By the way, now I think at the 10-minute mark, y'all understand why we're not calling them garden shorts anymore. But anyway, I've been trying to eradicate these things from my yard for years, not realizing what I actually had. And it's typically, they're the blue type, which is epitomized by the specimen here that I've had in the greenhouse. And they would come up, and nothing short of digging would get rid of them, and then they'd come back. When you break the stems apart, they have a sort of mucilage that is kind of gross, but the stems freely break, so you can't just pull them up. You have to actually dig them out with a shovel to really get at them. And even then, you're not guaranteed to kill them. So I embarked on a campaign trying to eradicate them. Guess what? Much like the war on drugs, the campaign failed. They're still here, and a truce has been formed now that I realize, after doing the write-up for forage foods, that they are actually a very safe and easy to use plant. They're not invasive. They're not like mint or oregano, which it gets out and gets everywhere. They're actually a good plant. Now, again, I've tried everything in the book to get rid of them during that. I even tried boiling water at one point. Not very effective. But upon seeing cultivated forms of them in gardens that had gotten several feet high and were blooming and covered in pollinators, and me realizing that I have an endemic group of mason bees on one portion of my property, the area that I intentionally do not mow, I realized, why fight the flavor? Why fight the feeling? So spiderworts, aside from when I have to mow, get a reprieve from all forms of control. Because it turns out they're very, very, very useful. They're also super easy. I don't have to actually do anything. They're good with just rainfall, which means if they were under cultivation, as this specimen is, and it's quite a nice specimen, you can see it's side shooting avidly here. The little babies look like this, but the central cluster is quite thick and robust. I don't know if it's home to any critters, any caterpillars or larval stages of butterflies or whatever, but it is a suitable stand-in for any type of grass. Because, of course, the foliage does look like grass. You would mistake it for a type of grass until the flowering stalks come out. And at least it's native, and at least I know what I'm getting, and at least I know it's edible. And it has medicinal qualities, plus dye. So, that's all I have for you regarding widow's tears, aka Virginia spiderwort, our local evergreen perennial. I recommend it to you out there, assuming it's not an invasive where you are. And that's basically it. So, this is our first longer than normal video of 2023, plus or minus mischief content. So, if you like this video, please hit subscribe. If you have any comments, please leave them in the comments section. The blog will be updating as normal. There's a little bump, getting it set up and doing the new format. And of course, as always, folks, keep them growing. And by the way, don't mind my voice. Just got over the COVID. Yeah, I know. Eventually, the COVID's gonna get you. The COVID's gonna... Yeah, unfortunately. I dodged it for almost 3 years, and then suddenly it's like, nah, man, I got you, garden boy. So anyway, my God, mischief, what are you doing? Anyway, so with that said, thank you for watching. Keep them growing.